It was a strange contract, even for a viper witcher. 50 orens to track a killer that left no blood on the road, no claw marks on the body, and a trail that smelled like a noblewoman's bathhouse in the middle of a muddy swamp. The merchant spoke of a curse, but Caelen recognized the signs of a creature that didn't just hunt for food, it invited its prey to die with a smile on their face. The rain in the Pontar Valley turned the world into a heavy, sodden, slate-gray smear, pressing dampness into every timber, stone, and wool cloak along the crossroads. Water ran off the steep thatch roofs of the roadside huts in thick, dark ropes, turning the dirt yard into a sluggish river of black mud and decaying straw. Before reaching the crossroads, Caelen had spent 3 unbroken hours in the saddle, navigating the marshy flats that stretched east of the river. The mud had clung to Rye's fetlocks with a heavy, sucking sound at every step. The landscape offered no shelter. Only gnarled willow trunks bent sideways by the prevailing western winds, their bare branches sweeping the black water of the ditches like frayed ropes. The air carried the bitter, sharp reek of peat fires, wet marsh grass, and rotting alder roots, the eternal stench of the Temerian lowlands in late autumn. Caelen sat on a low, waterlogged bench outside the Drowned Hen, a low-roofed tavern situated at the muddy junction where the trade routes split toward Alunder and Vizima. He was wearing a worn, boiled leather doublet, reinforced at the shoulders with steel studs. It was stained dark by grease, rain, and years of road dust. Hanging from his neck, partially tucked beneath his wool collar, was a sleek, flat-headed silver viper medallion coiled with its fangs bared, resting flat against his chest armor. He held a narrow strip of oiled leather between his thumb and forefinger, steadily dragging it down the blade of his steel sword. The rhythmic, whisper-soft scrape filled the yard alongside the squelch of manure, the clatter of loose thatch, and the miserable lowing of oxen hitched to covered wagons. The motion was practiced, automatic, and soothing, a grounding ritual learned decades ago in the cold stone cellars of Gorthurgvade, before the Viper School fell to ruin and memory. The steel blade was 4 feet of high carbon iron, tempered in the mountain smithies of the south. Its surface showed fine wave-like patterns from repeated folding, completely free of rust, despite the relentless dampness. Caelen wiped a fleck of gray grit from the crossguard, his calloused thumb tracing the shallow groove running down the center of the metal. A witcher maintained his tools not out of affection or pride, but because a dull edge or a pitted scabbard meant a fraction of a second lost in the dark, and a fraction of a second was usually the difference between earning a purse of orens and feeding the local crows. The tavern door creaked open on rusted iron hinges, spilling the sour stench of stale ale, roasted turnip skins, wet wool, and dirty dog onto the porch. A man stepped out, pulling a rabbit-skin cap low over his ears to ward off the chill drippings from the eaves. He was broad, heavy-set, and firm, his thick fingers calloused from counting coin, tightening hemp ropes, and securing heavy wooden cargo crates. "You're still here, Witcher," the merchant said, his voice grating like 2 millstones grinding together without grain. "I thought your kind moved fast when there was a coin to be made." Caelen kept his eyes fixed upon his blade, his thumb making another slow pass along the fuller. "Coin dries leather boots slowly, Master Varric. Rain dictates the pace of the road, and cargo schedules wait for the weather. Varric spat into the mud, watching the brown spittle disappear into the slush. 2 days I've been stuck in this dunghill. 2 days while my brother's wagon sits in the weeds 3 miles up the east road, sinking deeper into the mire with every hour. The local guards refuse to go near the tree line. They sit inside by the hearth, drinking my ale and shaking in their boots. They call it a curse. They call it the devil of the mire. Local peasants attach grand titles to every unseen predator in the woods. Caelen said calmly, his voice low and steady, matching the dull rhythm of the falling rain. He sheathed the steel blade with a quiet metallic click that echoed softly under the wooden eaves. Detail the situation with your brother once more. Omit nothing about the time, the weather, or the horses. Varric sighed, a long, rattling breath that smelled of pickled cabbage, and leaned his heavy shoulder against the damp porch frame. Jorund was driving the lead wagon, 4 draft horses, 2 barrels of Temerian rye, 3 crates of fine Vizima linen. We lost sight of him when the fog rolled off the river just before dusk, thick as curds and white as salt. No screams reached us. No iron clashing. No horses panicking. When we caught up an hour later, the horses stood hitched to the driver's seat, shivering in the cold mist like newborn pups. Jorund lay in the ditch beside the wheel. Describe his condition. His coat remained intact, Varric muttered, lowering his voice until it barely carried above the sound of the water dripping from the roof. The wool showed no tears, no blood on the weave, no red grass in the ditch. His skin appeared pale as lard, drawn tight across his teeth, drained entirely from the inside out, and an aroma lingered over the scene. Caelen raised a faint, straw-colored eyebrow, his amber pupil adjusting slightly in the gloom. Describe the aroma. Smelled like sweet roses and jasmine, the merchant spat, his brows furrowed. Right over a filthy, stagnant swamp ditch. Caelen reached down, picking up his travel pack from the wet bench. The leather was dark with oil, the brass buckles worn smooth from years of travel across the northern realms. 50 orens, half now for alchemy supplies and oil, half when your brother's body is secured for a proper burial. Varric winced, pulling his rabbit skin cap lower over his ears. 50? That's a robbery. I can hire a local watchman to haul a dead man out of a ditch for 10. I need Jorund buried, sure, but there's other property sitting unattended in that wagon that can't rot in the rain. Hire the watchman, then, Caelen said dryly, slinging the heavy pack over his shoulder. They can stand in the fog with wooden clubs while the monster takes its fill of their necks and your fine Vizima linen. The merchant paused, his small eyes darting nervously toward the east road before fixing back on the Witcher's pale, cat-like amber eyes. He swallowed hard, clearly weighing the cost of the Witcher against the far higher value of the untouched crates sitting in the dark. Reaching deep into his wool tunic, he pulled out a heavy leather pouch tied with hemp twine and shoved it into Caelen's open palm. Find him, Varric grunted, his fingers lingering on the coin purse a second too long before letting go. And see to it that wagon stays untouched by anything or anyone. The body of Jorund rested in a cold, windowless shed situated directly behind the crossroads smithy. Caelen stepped through the low oak doorway, his head bowing instinctively beneath the heavy lintel. The atmosphere inside was thick with the scent of damp earth, chilled slag, wood ash, and iron filings. The dead merchant lay stretched flat upon a broad pine workbench that usually held wagon axles and iron wheel hoops. A mud-stained wool blanket covered the corpse from brow to boots. A single tallow candle flickered atop an overturned wooden bucket nearby, its flame guttering in the draught and casting long, erratic shadows across the unhewn timber walls. Caelen pulled back the wool blanket with a slow, deliberate motion, folding the rough fabric down to the man's chest. Joran's face presented a stark, waxy, translucent white, tight and drawn across his prominent cheekbones like aged parchment. The Witcher bent low, his obsidian-flecked amber eyes narrowing as he conducted a methodical body examination. He checked the hairline, the delicate skin behind the ears, the jawline, and the throat. There were no shredded wounds or crushed throat bones, none of the bloody carnage left behind by a ghoul or a grave hag. Near the left collarbone, positioned precisely over the carotid pulse point, Caelen located his target. 2 microscopic puncture wounds, no wider than darning needles, exquisitely clean and entirely devoid of swelling or cellular inflammation. The surrounding skin showed a faint, bruised violet discoloration, a localized shadow left by unnatural vascular suction. Caelen leaned down until his nose hovered mere inches above the puncture marks, inhaling slowly through his nostrils. Beneath the sharp stench of tallow smoke and the stale odor of dead tissue, the residual signature endured. Night-blooming jasmine, heavy, sweet, and suffocatingly rich. He pulled the heavy blanket back over the corpse's face and rose to his full height, his leather armor creaking softly in the quiet room. "An intelligent hunter," Caelen said, his rough voice barely a whisper against the timber walls. "It treats its prey like fine wine, opening the bottle with care, taking its fill, and leaving no mess behind." He exited into the mud-splattered yard, where Rye stood sheltered beneath the overhang of the shoeing barn. The dun mare turned her dark eyes toward him, blowing a small puff of steam from her nostrils. Caelen unbuckled the left saddlebag, reaching into the padded, velvet-lined casing where his delicate alchemy glass sat secured in oiled straw. He selected 3 small, stoppered vials, silver, dark blue, and clear crystal. Whatever waited up the east road possessed taste, patience, and lethal grace. It did not hunt out of animal starvation. It invited its targets into a sweet, hypnotic trap. The east road dissolved directly into the dense forest, its broad cart ruts smoothing into overgrown cobblestones buried beneath decades of damp pine needles and rotting leaf mold. As Rye moved deeper beneath the canopy, the steady patter of open rain gave way to a persistent heavy dripping from the ancient oak branches above. The mist rolled off the low river flats in thick, slow waves, clinging to the gray tree trunks like torn muslin. The forest remained quiet and heavy. The upper canopy held no chattering jays or crows. The rotted brake below harbored no rustling voles or foraging badgers. The rhythmic, muffled thud of Rye's hooves against the wet earth provided the sole sound along the desolate path. Caelen maintained his posture in the saddle, his left hand resting lightly on the brass pommel of his sword. His viper medallion hung motionless against his chest armor, silent in the cool air. A mile off the main trade track, the thick foliage parted to reveal the rusted iron gates of an ancient, forgotten estate. The massive stone archway above had long since collapsed into mossy rubble, its carved coat of arms choked by thick, thorny brambles and wild ivy. Beyond the threshold lay an estate built in the old Elven architectural style, with soaring, slender arches, crumbling terrace balconies, and glass conservatory roofs that had shattered into jagged, glittering teeth pointing toward the gray sky. Caelen dismounted gracefully, looping Rye's leather reins around a sturdy, low-hanging birch branch. He stroked the mare's damp neck, his hand firm and reassuring as he leaned close to her twitching ear. "Stay quiet, girl," he whispered. "Should the damp air begin to carry the scent of sweet rose blossoms or jasmine, break the leather strap and head back to the crossroads without stopping." The horse huffed a cloud of white vapor into the chill air, her ears flicking back as she stood still against the tree trunk. Caelen unslung his steel blade, leaving it secured in its scabbard against the saddle, treating common steel as unnecessary burden for what lay ahead. He reached over his shoulder and drew his silver sword. The long, narrow blade slid from its polished scabbard, with a clear, ringing hum that hovered in the heavy mist for several seconds. He stepped through the ruined iron gates into the quiet, grand courtyard. Caelen walked the perimeter of the courtyard, his cat-like amber pupils dilating to absorb the dying evening light. His eyes moved methodically over the damp stonework, searching for the physical signatures left behind by post-conjunction entities. At the base of a cracked marble fountain overgrown with pale lichen, he found the carcass of a red fox. He knelt, turning the small animal over with the tip of his boot. The fur remained intact, and the delicate bones completely unbroken, yet its dark eyes showed burst blood vessels from an intense internal wave of acoustic pressure. Killed from the inside out, Caelen muttered softly into the gray twilight, a screech hard enough to rupture organs without leaving a scratch on the skin. He stepped through a tall, pointed archway into what had once been a grand ballroom. Every single sheet of mirror glass along the plaster walls had been systematically smashed into fine, glittering powder across the floorboards, while intact glass sheets had been turned around to face the stone walls directly. An aversion to reflections, he noted, his gaze drifting up toward the rotting, waterlogged velvet drapes hanging from the musicians' gallery. Deep in the shadows of the ballroom, he found a second victim, a local woodcutter, dead for a week. The man sat slumped against a carved wooden pillar, his hands resting naturally in his lap. His face appeared calm and peaceful, his skin as white as salted pork, drained entirely through two neat punctures behind his left ear. Caelen bent down, brushing his calloused fingers across the damp stone floor near the woodcutter's boots. He brought his hand to his face and inhaled. The air held a rich, heavy aroma. Sweet rose, ripe black cherries, and night-blooming jasmine. He stood up, his amber eyes tracking the shadow lines of the vaulted ceiling high above. The physical evidence aligned with cold, mathematical precision. A Bruxa occupied the estate. A higher vampire possessing immense speed, lethal vocal power, and hypnotic influence, selecting its prey with deliberate, refined preference. Caelen reached down, unclasping his silver medallion from his collar. He held it by its heavy chain, letting the coiled viper dangle in the stillness of the ballroom. The silver serpent began to hum, passing a faint, rhythmic vibration up the iron links into his fingertips. Caelen let out a long, slow breath, his mouth curving into a thin, cynical smile. "A Bruxa," he said aloud to the empty ballroom, his voice echoing flatly against the ruined stone. "The merchants offer 20 orens for a simple drowner, expecting a witcher to risk his life for 50 against a creature that sings in High Elder." He turned back toward the courtyard, his boots crunching softly on the powdered glass as he prepared the grounds for nightfall. Night fell over the Elven estate in a thick, dark blanket. The gray dusk dissolved into a pitch-black canopy, unlit by moon or stars, leaving the ruined conservatory steeped in shadow. Caelen stepped into the center of the shattered glass pavilion. High above, the wrought iron ribs of the domed ceiling arched into the darkness like the rib cage of a leviathan. He set his heavy travel pack upon a dry stone pedestal and began his preparations with calm, mechanical precision. Against a Bruxa, absolute preparation dictated survival. He unbuckled his potion kit. From the padded velvet slots he drew a squat, heavy glass vial bound in brass wire containing a dark, viscous liquid, black blood. The mixture contained purified vitriol, distilled nightshade, and liquefied silver salts, formulated specifically to turn a witcher's circulatory system into a reservoir of corrosive poison. Caelen unstoppered the wax seal. An odor of copper, bitter almonds, and scorched bone bloomed from the glass. He tilted his head back and drank it down in 3 heavy swallows. A wave of intense heat surged down his esophagus, spreading into his chest. Caelen fell to one knee, his hand gripping the edge of the stone pedestal until his knuckles turned white. His heart hammered in a brief burst before the potion seized his blood vessels, forcing his pulse down to a slow, icy crawl. His skin turned ash-gray while dark, swollen veins mapped themselves across his face in the dim light. His amber eyes dilated until the irises vanished entirely, leaving 2 pools of solid obsidian that absorbed the room's ambient shadow. He stood up slowly, steadying his stomach, and reached back into his satchel. He produced a velvet pouch filled with pulverized moon dust, a mixture of fine silver shavings, ground brimstone, and dried saltpeter. Caelen walked a wide circle around the center of the conservatory floor, flicking his wrist to scatter the glittering dust across the flagstones, so the microscopic silver particles would cling to any invisible form. Gathering a small bundle of dry birch bark, dried pine needles, and hemlock leaves into a pile on the stone floor, he snapped his thumb and forefinger together to produce a brief orange spark of the Igni sign. A low, gentle flame caught the bark. The small fire flickered low and controlled, casting a narrow, 5-foot circle of warm amber light across the surrounding gloom. The scent of burning birch mixed with the bitter tang of hemlock, filling the cold air. Caelen unsheathed his silver sword, placing the long, double-edged blade flat across his knees. He sat down cross-legged before the small fire, resting his wrists upon his thighs. He closed his obsidian eyes and inhaled slowly through his nose. He entered the Witcher's deep meditation trance, dropping his body temperature and dulling his nervous system until he sat motionless like a stone statue in a leather doublet. His senses expanded outward in concentric rings. He heard Rye 300 paces away, stamping her hooves lightly against the muddy earth. He heard cold groundwater trickling through the stone cellars beneath his boots. He heard the wind combing through the needle canopy of the forest a mile to the west. Deep within the darkness of the high vaults above, the air shifted. The bitter scent of his hemlock fire gave way to a sharp, sweet burst of night-blooming jasmine and rose. His silver viper medallion began to hum, a cold metallic vibration pulsing directly against his chest. She was awake, descending from the rafters. She drifted down from the rusted iron framework of the glass dome, her silhouette materializing slowly out of the shadows. Her long, tattered gown of midnight-colored silk fluttered in the cold draft. Her skin showed a stark, luminous white, catching the faint starlight filtering through the shattered roof. Then, she began to sing. A melody sung in high elder drifted down through the cold conservatory air, an ancient, mournful lullaby as soft and liquid as falling snow. The words carried a subtle, physical resonance that caused the flames of Caelen's small fire to dance and bow in rhythm with her voice. The ancient vocalizations folded into the darkness like velvet, each syllable sculpted with delicate precision. The tongue of the Aen Seid was fluid, built upon sweeping vowels and gentle sibilant cadences that bypassed the conscious mind entirely. She sang of lost gardens beneath pale blue moons, of ivory towers rising above silent seas, and of a rest without pain, memory, or fear. The melody operated directly upon the nervous system, loosening muscle tension, slowing involuntary tremors, and lulling the listener into a warm, hypnotic trance where defensive instincts evaporated. Caelen kept his eyes closed and his hands resting on the silver blade across his lap. Deep within his Witcher trance, he activated the mental defenses honed through years of grueling meditation. He anchored his focus on the physical reality of his body. The cold stone against his calves, the bitter metallic burn of the black blood in his veins, and the steady, artificial slowing of his heart. He let the words of the lullaby wash over him like water against granite, refusing to give the song a point of entry in his mind. The Viper trial had forged his mind in isolation, teaching him to treat external auditory manipulation as simple wave frequencies rather than meaningful thought. He broke her song down into its component physics, pitch, resonance, breath control, and pressure dynamics. By deconstructing the beauty into mere vibration, he stripped the enchantment of its power. The voice grew closer, dropping from the high arches down to the flagstones without the sound of a single footfall. A faint breeze rippled through the scattered moon dust. Microscopic flakes of silver caught the light, outlining a slender, fluid form as it moved in a slow arc around the perimeter of the firelight. The Bruxa stopped 3 paces away, remaining just outside the circle of warmth. Caelen opened his obsidian eyes slowly. She stood motionless, her dark silk dress draped over a frame of delicate proportions. Her hair spilled in raven curls over bare marble shoulders. Her face possessed a sculptured pale beauty, while her eyes remained entirely black, devoid of whites or irises, mirroring Caelen's own potion-blown pupils. Her lips parted slightly, revealing needle-sharp fangs wet with saliva in the firelight. She tilted her head, her nostrils flaring as she inhaled deeply. The scent of the Witcher reached her. She registered the warm smoke of the birch bark alongside the suffocating, toxic reek of black blood, a mixture saturated with silver and nightshade that would sear her throat. She took a half step back, her dark eyes narrowing. "A Witcher," she whispered, her voice carrying a low, velvet rasp with the faint, echo-like vibration of a sonic threat. "A cold, poisonous human sitting in my garden." Caelen remained motionless, keeping his posture unchanged. "The garden stands abandoned, lady," Caelen said, his voice flat and gravelly from the potion, and the men who walked into it have ceased their travels. The Bruxa circled him again, her bare feet gliding over the flagstones in total silence. Her gaze lingered on his hands, which rested loosely upon his knees, inches from the silver sword. She recognized the trap. Smelling the alchemy saturating his frame and seeing the silver dust clinging to her own dress, preventing an invisible escape into the wind. She remained in the conservatory, choosing not to flee into the cellars or initiate a strike. A quiet, tense truce descended upon the courtyard. Hunter and beast remained bound in a standstill of patience. The Bruxa stayed perched at the edge of the light, her black eyes tracking the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of Caelen's chest. Caelen kept his gaze fixed upon her, his mind steady, his muscles prepared for the first movement of an attack. The small birch fire crackled softly, throwing red embers into the air. Outside, the night deepened into its coldest, quietest hour. The stars drifted slowly across the open gaps in the iron dome above, tracking the passage of time while the Witcher and the vampire watched each other across the dying embers. In the final hour before dawn, the silence remained unbroken. The small birch fire burned down to a bed of dark crimson coals, casting a dull glow across the conservatory flagstones. The bitter tang of hemlock faded, replaced by the damp odor of wet stone and ancient earth. Caelen held his position without moving. His obsidian eyes tracked the fluid shifts of the Bruxa's silhouette at the edge of the pavilion. The toxic burn of black blood in his veins settled into an icy ache, heavy and deadening, while his focus remained sharp. The vampire held her ground. The scent of the potion, paired with the readiness of the silver blade across his lap, kept her bound in calculating patience. She watched him, her black eyes reflecting the last embers, her dark silk gown motionless in the stagnant air. The standstill was a battle of endurance. For 2 full hours before the dawn, neither hunter nor beast altered their breathing pattern. The cold crept through Caelen's leather armor, biting at his joints, yet his viper training suppressed the body's natural urge to shiver. Across the coals, the Bruxa remained as static as a marble monument, her needle-thin fangs tucked behind dark lips, waiting for the potion in the Witcher's blood to wane or his attention to slip. Caelen's gaze never faltered. The silver blade on his knees reflected the dull red glow of the dying fire, a constant gleaming barrier between them. The sky above the shattered dome began to turn. The pitch-black canopy softened into a pale, bruised violet. High above, the first light of dawn struck the iron ribs of the conservatory. A cool morning draft swept through the arches, carrying the fresh scent of damp pine needles and wet earth. The Bruxa raised her head toward the light. Her pale skin caught the cold morning gray, her expression shifting into a quiet, ancient sorrow for the sun. She turned her gaze back to Caelen. "The night has ended, Witcher," she whispered, her voice drifting through the conservatory like dry autumn leaves, "and your heart continues to beat." Caelen blinked once, a slow, deliberate movement of his darkened eyes. She stepped backward into the deep shadows of the archway. The silver moon dust clinging to her dress glittered faintly one last time before her form retreated into the gloom. Her movement carried only the quiet sound of soft silk rustling against old stone as she descended into the lightless vaults beneath the estate. The conservatory stood empty. Caelen let out a long, shuddering breath, a cloud of white vapor rising from his lips into the freezing morning air. He closed his eyes, breaking his meditation trance. Methodically, he flexed his fingers around the grip of his silver sword, his joints popping from hours of stillness. The black blood receded from his circulatory system, leaving a heavy fatigue in his limbs while his pulse stabilized. He stood up, his boots crunching softly on the shattered glass scattered across the floor. He walked to the edge of the pavilion, where a dark, arched stairwell spiraled down into the foundations of the ruined manor. Cold, stagnant air billowed up from the depths below, thick with the smell of wet clay, old dust, and the lingering perfume of night-blooming jasmine. He unstoppered a small crystal vial from his belt, the cat, and swallowed the clear liquid. The potion burned cold against his tongue, expanding his pupils to catch the daylight bleeding down the stone steps, turning the pitch-black stairwell into a clear landscape of grays and sharp shadows. Caelen adjusted the leather strap of his doublet, tested the weight of his silver blade in his right hand, and took his first step down into the dark. The contract was not yet finished.